Hello, today we're going to be taking a look at some computer case fans, and I'm going to be showing you the airflow. So I'm going to be showing you how loud each fan can get and how quiet, and I'll try to tell you which fans also have better airflow at the end. Now the only fan that's running right now is my CPU cooler fan, the CPU cooler that came with the Ryzen 1700, the stock cooler. So let's go ahead and begin. So here's a fan that came with my case, the Phanteks SP140, I believe it's what it's called. Alright, so I got it plugged in. It's 40%. 60%. 80%. 100%. So that gets pretty quiet at about 40%. So let's go ahead and move on to the next fan. Now I'll tell you what I think about each fan near the end, just to give a conclusion. Here we have a Fractal GP 140, I believe, 14 is what I believe it's called. %, 60%, 80%, 100%. And going down. So let's go ahead and do the next fan. So here we have a Rosewill 140 Hyperbora. %, and this one's PWM, so I have to plug it into a different port. 60%. This one is rattling a little bit, so I will probably lift it up when we get to 100. 80%. 100%. Okay, so my opinion on that one is definitely the loudest, above 60%, and pushes the most air. But it is very loud. And at 40%, I would say the airflow is about the same as the Phanteks, maybe less. And it's about the same quietness. So here we have a Corsair SP140. And the cable is very short on this. So I might not be able to get it in frame. That's 40%. 60%. 80%. 100%. So you can see this is probably the loudest fan I have. Anything above 60 is like an airplane engine. At 40%, it's actually quiet. And I wouldn't go any higher than that. And the airflow is about the same as the other, as the Phanteks and the other Rosewill. And those three fans do have more airflow at 40% compared to that Fractal that we looked at. Did we look at this one? No, actually, I don't think we did. I don't think we did this one. Corsair ML140. Well, actually, I was saving this one for last because I might get the cable stuck in the port. It's kind of hard to pull that one out. So let's do this one instead. This is also a Corsair ML140, but this is the radiator version, and not the case fan version, so it has a shorter cable. And this one is different for some reason. So that's 40%. 60. 80. 100. That one doesn't really push a whole lot of air until you get about 80. And I would say it's a little louder at 80 compared to the other ones at 40%. Actually, it's still pushing a good amount of air at 60 and it's still quiet. But if you leave this one on 40, it will be super quiet, but it loses a bit of that airflow. So I think the ideal spot would be 60. Yeah, see, it's a decent amount of air at 60. I don't think we did this one. This one is a Rosewill EFD series 140mm fan. And you can buy this one off of Newegg, and it comes in a 2-pack. So that's 40%. It's about as quiet and weak as the Fractal at 40. 60. Again, quiet and weak. 80. 100. So I would say at 80 and 100, it gets a little louder than the Fractal and pushes a little more air. But I'd say this one's just as good as the Fractal, maybe better. And at 80, it's probably pushing about the same amount of air as the other fans at about the same volume. So here we have a Artic F14, I believe it's called, 140mm fan. So almost no air and super quiet at 40%. 60. 80. 100. So I would say this one's also better than the Fractal. It's about as quiet. So it's a little quieter than that Rosewill EFD. And it pushes probably at 80 or 100. It's a little quieter, but it pushes about the same amount of air, maybe just as much. So this is probably the best quiet fan. So here's a RFA-120 millimeter Rosewill fan. Oh wait, no, sorry. This is the IP56 dustproof Rosewill fan. That's 40. A pretty good air at 40, and it's pretty quiet. 60. 80. 100. So I would say that one doesn't get as loud as the Corsair SP, and it doesn't push as much air, so it's probably more similar to the Corsair ML140. So about just as loud as that and about just as much airflow. And then here's the Rosewill RFA-120 millimeter. They have an LED version and a non-LED version. Cable's really short on this one. Even that pushes a good amount of air at 40. 60. 80. 100. So I would say this one's very similar to the Corsair SP140. Well, that last Rosewill that we just did was probably similar to the Corsair ML140. I can barely get that cable out. And actually, I haven't shown you the Corsair ML140. I showed you the radiator version. So here's the non-radiator version. The reason why I'm doing this one last is because the cable kind of gets stuck in the port. I would say that's the most airflow at 40% and still somewhat quiet. 60. 80. 100. So you can see at like 60 and above, that one gets pretty loud. And I was actually able to get that pull out. Alright, so one more, and that's the one that I have in the case right now, so it is going to sound louder than it actually is when it's outside of the case. And I got like 3 or 4 of them in the case. So that's the Noctua Chroma Max, which is also known as the NFD14 or whatever it's called. And I believe that's running at 100% right now. Let me plug it into the other port. Wait until they shut off. So yeah, there's 100%. But if I leave them at like 20%, they're super duper quiet and they push a pretty good amount of air. And then this is 40. You can kind of hear them now. Now normally I would put this on silent mode on my motherboard, but right now I'm using speed fan. So if I'm using speed fan, I'd probably put them at 20%. And then they're pretty quiet in the case. So that's about it. So let me go ahead and do my conclusion now. I would say the Corsair SP140 is the loudest, but also pushes the most air. And then the next loudest will probably have to be either the Rosewill 120 RFA or the Corsair ML140 non-radiator. Those two are probably the next best in airflow, but also the loudest, the second loudest. And then I would say the Rosewill IP56 is maybe the next best in airflow, but also probably the third loudest. And then down from that, I would say the Rosewill Hyperbora is maybe about the same as the Phanteks SP140 in terms of airflow and loudness, but those two are a little quieter, but probably still not acceptable in terms of loudness, but they do got good airflow. And I forgot about the Rosewill EFD series. I would say, actually no, I didn't really forget about that one. I would say the airflow on this is the next best, but it would be the next quietest. But the Artic probably pushes just as much airflow as the Rosewill EFD, but is a little quieter. And just a tiny bit quieter than the Artic fan would probably then be the Fractal GP14. But that pushes like almost no air. And Artic, once you get it up to like 60, 80, you know, it's still pretty quiet and it still pushes a decent amount of air. And then I would say the radiator version of the Corsair ML140 is about even with the Artic. And that's about it. And the only other fan I didn't mention would be the Noctua. And my personal opinion, I think it pushes maybe definitely more at 20. When it's running at like 20%, I'd say it's kind of as quiet as the Artic when running at like 80%. So the Noctua, I would say, is about just as good as the Artic. So what fans would I recommend? If you get the Phanteks on sale, they're about like $10 each. Well, the Artic, you could buy a 5-pack for about 25 bucks. So they're about $5 each. And if you're just looking for the quietest fan, but not necessarily the best airflow, I would go with the Artic. And then the Rosewill 2-pack, the EFD series, is not a bad buy either. You get like 2 or 3 of those, that'd be about the same price as the Artic. And but I would say those get a little louder than the Artic though. So I'd rather get the Artic. And then other than the Phanteks, the only other one I would so other than the Artic, the Rosewill EFD, and the Phanteks, the only other one I would recommend is the Noctua if you can get them on sale, which they can go as down as low as about $10 a fan. So thank you for watching.